Now in this video, I'm going to talk you through a US comedian called Sam Hyde, who had 21 million views responding to Elon Musk. And in this video, he's going to be kind of critical of migrant workers and what they bring to the US or bring on to the West in general. And specifically, he's talking about the H-1B visa migrant workers. And he had 21 million views. It kind of went viral. And we kind of live in this crazy upside down clown world where it takes a comedian to stand up for US workers, right? Or people in the West. It's not politicians, it's not Trump, it's not Elon or Vivek or any of these so-called experts, these billionaires who apparently have the best interest of US workers at heart. It actually is comedians who can speak the truth. And just in case you're not aware of who Sam Hyde is, a very important figure. He was one of the first or early cases of people getting cancelled. And you might remember that a lot of people getting cancelled in cancel culture were people who were comedians because they would have to make fun of society to do their job. And in order to do that, they would say some things that would be a bit politically incorrect, right? So let's listen to what he has to say about Vivek and the whole perspective of migrant workers.
Amazing what the kid does with video games. I can't believe it. People didn't suddenly have a flare-up of India hate. I've been monitoring the Indian hate websites for a while. It's actually set to my homepage. I've been checking these websites out. I watch what these people do. There were very few overt Indian haters spewing their nonsensical filth everywhere 72 hours ago. What happened? 72 hours ago, most people in the MAGA base looked at Vivek Ramaswamy with some notion of admiration or, hey, that guy says cool stuff every once in a while. Hey, you know what? I think I like that guy. Now, he's got to be deported. Sucks, man. And he's not being deported because of the color of his skin. He's being deported for the content of his character. And I think that truly was a mask-off moment where we saw that Vivek Ramaswamy really is just a fucking nerd who needs to go back. I think that what you did is different. I think it's everybody spurgs out. I'm spurging out right now. I'm gonna spurg out later, okay? On Chris, Lynch. And also, Indians do cool stuff every once in a while. They got the chest slapping, wrestling. You guys watch that action movies. He's shooting a bullet out of the air with a gun. He's flipping over the tuk-tuk. Indian clubs, shoulder rehab exercise, fantastic. The hate, it's irrational hate. It's just racism. It's just a nonsensical racism. The hate and racism and anti-Indian sentiment, it's there to the extent that Indians are being used to replace white people. That's it.
So there's a couple key points I want to focus on here, right? Firstly, he doesn't like the fact that Vivek, who's an Indian guy who's been in the US for some time, is quite critical of US culture, and he says US culture is kind of lazy. This tweet from Vivek that basically cost him his job in a sense, right? He was working in Doge, which was the Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk, and then after this tweet, everything started to change for him. He kind of, even though they don't want to word it this way, he kind of got demoted from working at a senior government role with Elon Musk to running for the governor of Ohio, which is his next move. And it looks like he was pushed out because of this tweet. This tweet has 120 million views. It basically created a lot of conflict within the MAGA base, if you want to call it, or people on the right wing. Because what he's saying is, listen, US workers aren't always the most efficient. There's a lot of laziness in US culture, focus on consumerism, watching TV, not being the smartest or the best in terms of intelligence. And he's saying, he's pointing this out because a lot of people, and that's why he opens the term with IQ. A lot of people like to focus on IQ differences between races, and it's kind of a contentious topic saying that Indians have lower IQ or different demographics, or races have lower IQ, and that explains why their countries are less developed or they're less qualified or they're less good at doing a job. Now, a couple points here, right? I don't think that's always fair. I know people love to focus on the IQ, particularly I see a lot of white people who have a bit of focus on that, race realism, things like that. I think there's more nuance than that. If you look into some of the IQ testing, sometimes they were testing people who are making less money, poorer people who would have less intelligence compared to others in rural areas of a country, and that's kind of justified to say that certain races have lower IQ than others. Another thing is like, who can really question US culture or Western culture? Because Western culture, even though I think there's many good things about it, but it's like it wants to constantly have this idea that they're the best. Everything about them is the best. So it's like, I agree there shouldn't be as many migrant workers coming to the West, and a country's identity is somewhat based on the race, on the people who've been there for generations, not just migrant workers coming there to provide cheap labor for tech companies in this case. It's also like, if you want to be the best, can you compete with foreign competition? And that's really something to really think about, because I think if you put aside money for now, there is a very strong work ethic within Asian culture that you can't really say is just because they're desperate for money, or they're desperate for social status, or they're just working like slave labor. This is a constant talking point you see on the West. It's like, I think if you take the Western population and say, has it been weakened by consumerism? Has it been weakened by kind of a lazy, low work ethic or a sense of entitlement? I think those are fair criticisms. And maybe it's coming from a guy of Indian background, Vivek, so people don't want to pay attention to that, because when other right-wing commentators make those talking points, maybe a Candace Owens, maybe a white commentator, then that's acceptable. But it's like, you can't have this idea that the West is the best and it can't be criticized, or it can only be criticized from someone from that background. It just doesn't make sense, because in his kind of opening monologue, he does make some jokes about India. So it's like, can we make jokes about the West, or is that considered off limits? You're not allowed to make comments, otherwise you're going to be deported, right? So it's kind of a bit ridiculous. And like I say, this tweet got Vivek in trouble, essentially. Even they're not going to word it that way. And he's going to continue making some interesting perspectives about how migrant workers or Indian workers in the US are perceived.
We have to stop playing pretend. We're not talking about exceptional Indians here. And that's why this is sort of spreading like wildfire, people sharing these H-1B lists of what the jobs are. You are not in Calcutta scouting for the next Indian Einstein. You're not. We have to make it to outer space and invent new computers. Let's get to India and get the next Nikola Tesla. That's not what's happening. We're talking about people at fucking gas stations. You bring them over, you put them in a fucking gas station, and then we'll go around all the gas stations in the USA and find the next genius. Well, what if he's not in India? What if he's working at a gas station in North Carolina? He might be there. We don't know. Why don't we bring everybody here and then we can look for everybody? That's actually a fucking genius idea. We bring fucking everybody here, and then, like a needle in a haystack, we find the one man who can invent electrical computer. That sounds fucking retarded, and it's not true. You have to at least say that the H-1B program is being scammed. If you don't admit that, then as far as like any type of discussion that goes anywhere is concerned, it's over. It's over. Direct quote from Moist Critical himself. I'm speaking on his behalf. He was too busy streaming Marvel Rivals to talk to you. So I'm here on his behalf, giving you opinions that he approved, okay? Nobody's expecting you to go full Steve Bannon here. You're a tech bro, we get it. Immigrant. But if you are on Team America, and by Team America, I don't mean Ben Shapiro's collection of ideas. America's not a collection of ideas. America is a people, Americans. If you are Team America, then the most prominent talking points need to be the immediate deportation of illegals and the end of the abuse of the American worker by programs like this H-1B, the gamification of stuff like this that's set up to benefit people who aren't us.
So he's making a great point here, right? In terms of, you know, a lot of the people of the labor who do come from foreign countries, in this case, India or other migrants in general, the establishment loves to present it like, oh, they're super skilled workers, but in many cases they're not. In many cases, they are cheap labor for the tech industry, working in gas stations, working in McDonald's, Starbucks, things like that. And a lot of those jobs they do take are from people who would be typically in the younger generations in the West, who would maybe look for their part-time income while they're studying at university to work in McDonald's or Starbucks, or working maybe in a gas station, things like this. This type of lower level labor wage is typically how people get an entry into the job market at younger ages to pay off their student loans, to pay off their living costs while they develop their career to a more professional position, right? And a lot of these migrant workers are taking those jobs, and I think that's a fair point, right? And like he says, we can't pretend that migrant workers are coming here and they're only the highly skilled ones, because many people who are coming here, they're not the highly skilled ones. They are just people who are doing basic work, and corporations want to pay people a low wage, right? And this is really a misuse of local labor and foreign labor. It's not really about efficiency, innovation, diversity, whatever you're told. It's really about exploiting people in the West by pushing them into lower wages because they have to compete with foreign workers, and then exploiting foreign workers by paying them a low wage that they're willing to accept because their currency is weaker, for example, in India and things like this. And there is a lot of scamming going on in these outsourcing type of jobs, importing labor, undercutting the US wage, and like I say, paying migrant workers a relatively low wage, right? And yes, I agree with him. You need to deport the illegal workers or workers who aren't contributing and only accept migrant workers who are highly skilled, that you don't have those skills in your own country. Those are things I think that should be considered. A country should prioritize their own workers. So let's listen moving forward in terms of how countries can't just be economic units, economic trading zones, which is what it's become now for US, for the UK, of Europe, where it's just like there's no cultural identity, there's no ethnic identity. Everything's just about people becoming these replaceable cogs in a machine, in a corporation, economic units that can be interchangeable. So he's going to cover this in the topic here.
The only people who want to fix the American birth rate problem by turning America into India are fuckers. People are not interchangeable economic units. If they're not more than that, then that's just an extension of antinatalism. That's just nihilism. That's just people don't matter. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the universe doesn't care shit. The universe cares. That's why we're here. It's understandable why a computer guy, why an engineer would think that or would want to think that, because it would make solving problems so much easier. We have hardwired group preferences, we have genetic memory, we have culture. This is not learned stuff. It's so deeply embedded in us that it carries on for thousands of years. Thinking of people as interchangeable units, while it would be useful in a simulation or in an economic theorem, it strips them of their humanity. And by the way, it's one of the first steps towards any authoritarian dictatorship type system. It's one of the first steps towards Marxism, is thinking of people as just labor. It's a very gross, anti-human thing to think, just to appeal to the Redditor in you. That's middle brain shit. Stupid people at the bottom of the spectrum know that everybody is special. Everybody's special! Everybody's different and has their own thing. Retards know this. Geniuses understand that everybody is a unique product by and for their zeitgeist, or Zeitgeist if you want to go with the moist critical pronunciation. Everybody is uniquely a product of their time and location and has their place in space and time. The smart people know this, the stupid people know this. It's people in the middle with 110 IQ, which is the worst IQ to have, who think that people can just be pushed around and moved around and changed.
So he's pointing out the issue of the midwit IQ, the midwit meme. You might have seen it on my community posts, on my other videos, which is essentially people who might have lower IQ and people who have higher IQ. They understand things at an instinctual level, like, maximize money, maximize freedom, right? I want my free time, I want to have kids. You don't have to explain it, right? But people in the middle level of the IQ, and this is the idea that's come up quite popular on memes, is that they love to over-intellectualize everything. They love to be over-educated. They need a master's and they need a PhD. They need a complex way of discussing everything. And they also need to get the establishment's rubber stamp expert approval of things, right? They can't just think, hold on, do I need to wear a mask? Will a mask actually stop a virus infecting me? Or is it just a very thin layer that's just not good to be breathing in all the time through a mask, right? Just common sense. So what he's trying to say is, through common sense, human beings are more complex than just economic units. You can't just take someone from India and put them in New York and think they're just going to immediately assimilate to American culture, for example, right? And this is the issues with major metropolitan areas, New York, London, Singapore, wherever there's a lot of diversity, people feel quite isolated because they don't have a sense of community. They're kind of this economic unit plucked out of one country, put into the other. And culture is real, right? The impact that you can have in terms of distorting a culture through mass migration, you can see its impacts, right? And lots of people would prefer community with people around their similar ethnic background rather than the benefits of diversity, which people always bring up. Oh, it's so good to have so many different restaurants from different cultures. Yeah, you can have that without having mass migration, right? And lots of people have ancestral memory, which means you have the memory of your ancestors in your veins. A lot of that is your instincts or intuition. And lots of people have a close connection with their country. It's called the concept of blood and soil, or a natural tribalism that people have for their own kind. So when you do have mass migration and lots of migrant workers coming in, it can disrupt the natural community and family type of environment that people have, right? And the thing is, everything in society or in a healthy civilization is not about the line going up. You might see in the line going up meme, which is just basically, oh, everything's about the economy. We need to make GDP go up. We need to make more money. Everything's not about that in terms of day-to-day life and how a country operates. I know at an individual level, we want to make more money, but even at that, we want to maintain our health. We want to have good relationships, and that's how a country should operate. It shouldn't just be like, oh, we need these companies, they want to have cheap labor, so let's import hundreds of thousands of foreign workers, and not think, okay, well, it's going to destroy the middle class in those particular areas. It's going to devalue labor, and then it's going to have all these social impacts that come on beyond that, which is a lower birth rate, lack of people being happy in life, anxiety, depression, and things like that, and social isolation. This is the thing, it's very dehumanizing when you don't have a ruling class that focuses on valuing its own citizens and just focus on having the lower cost labor as possible, which is a kind of a distortion of capitalism.
They can't. No hate towards Hispanics, okay? But that's why the room that I'm sitting in is covered in dust, is because the general contractor I hired used Hispanic labor. I didn't know. They laid down masonry cement. When I said I wanted polished concrete floors, masonry cement, you can't polish it. They left board marks and footprints in it. And I had to pay another crew of black people, okay, shout out to Greg, to come in here with jackhammers and get this shit dumpstered out of here. I went and hired my own blacks. I went in the ghetto and hired them by hand. That's how you need to hire blacks for SpaceX. And what you get is you get lower quality construction. You get lower wages for the blue collar workers who are here and fighting. You realize that people are fucking up against the wall fighting to make ends meet? Do you understand that the American people are on the ropes right now? Your people are not the world, okay? It's the American people. That's where this shit is popping off. That's where you came to do business. The American people are your problem now, to the extent that you want people to pay attention to your opinion. And by people, I mean actual people, not Patrick Bet-David, not Ian Miles Chong, Scott Adams, not these fucking faggots that'll walk around sucking your ass because you have money and because you made an electric car. But to the extent that you want that, you have to protect the American people. You're all about being pro-natalism and increasing the birth rate. Why is the average dude gonna want to have kids when he can barely afford to live by himself and eat Domino's?
So, great point there, right? So when you have the decline of blue-collar work, he's comparing Hispanic migrants in this case to kind of maybe doing work for low cost, but not necessarily having the highest quality. And you can see the decline in quality in a lots of blue-collar work and the trades in some cases, and also includes white-collar work in the sense of people with office jobs, you know, with the Indian migrant workers in the case going into the tech industry, right? Now, the thing is, when it comes to the reality of being a human and not an economic unit, the question is, who are you honorable to, right? Who is your tribe? What is your perimeter? And typically it'd be people will be honorable to their local community, their country. That would be their tribe, right? And the perimeter would, of course, be the borders of that country. Whoever's in the country gets more priority over people who are out of it. These are basic male instincts, basic human instincts, right? And that's how the leadership should operate. But like I say, if they focus on cheap labor, then what's the point? If they focus on these ridiculous ideas, like DEI in some cases, mass migration, and it really destroys a country and people's personal identity. And that's why so many of these things, they really trigger people, because at a basic human level, they do feel quite uncomfortable with it. He mentioned PBD, who's kind of another, you know, wealthy influencer, conservative influencer. A lot of these people aren't who you should be impressing. If you are in a position of leadership, you should focus on your citizens, right? like I say, the lower quality of life and lower living standards, everyone sees it. It becomes unavoidable. You can't continually say, oh, having migrant workers is good for diversity, is good for innovation, when people are not seeing the benefits of that, right? And right at the end, he mentions there's kind of millions of disillusioned men who are going to impact in the sense they have lower birth rates, and over time, obviously, this will lead to civil unrest. Not saying I'm encouraging that, but just saying that's how things will happen if you don't have a sustainable future for men. What are men expected to do? Not have families, just focus on working and consuming, working their day job, playing video games. That's not really a sustainable society, right? And then he mentions in some other sections of the video around competing with China, and he says, oh, China's not taking on a lot of migrant workers, so why is the US? And this is the thing, I think China is not perfect. There are a lot of censorship and coercive government controls. It's a bit like they have their whole smart city surveillance state. I'm not saying they're perfect in China, but I visited China for 3 weeks in Shanghai previously, and it was like a university trip, and they were organized by UK universities to learn about Chinese culture and how they work and live on a day-to-day basis. And I found it very interesting, right, how it works, right? Firstly, they're very focused on self-sufficiency. They're focused on valuing their own people. They're not focused on valuing people outside the country and pushing diversity. They're focused on a hard-working culture, and in a sense, they do well without migrants. Same thing with Japan. They have successful tech industries, successful functioning systems without lots of migrants. So a lot of the propaganda you're pushed in the West, you need to have open border migrant policy. They're bringing all these benefits. That's not necessarily what the case is a lot of the times, right? Now, the US establishment, rather than empowering their people, particularly in the West in general, rather than empowering their own citizens, they've demoralized them, they've emasculated the men, they've created a sense of entitlement with a lot of the women. And a lot of this dumbed down culture is because they'd rather have you weak and easy to control as consumers rather than competent, productive, happy and citizens in a society. They've deliberately pushed the dumb down of their culture. It's not a coincidence that there's a massive consumerist culture in some of these countries. They're not the world leaders, and they're not focused on innovation like some of these other countries were in the past. So that's what they want you to do, right? They want you to accept lower living standards, higher living costs, and a collapse in the birth rate. These are not coincidences. These are like deliberate things that have occurred as part of this migrant policy that the West has promoted, which has impacted the labor markets, right?
Elon doubles down in this tweet, offering a false dichotomy. Either we have to have more legal immigration, or you, the person disagreeing with it, you want America to fail for your own personal gain. What personal gain are you talking about? You want America to fail for your own personal gain. What is, Elon, what are you talking about? How does anybody personally gain from this? The only gain happening is in stock prices of tech companies. That's the gain. That's where the gain is. Cui bono. That's who stands to benefit from this arrangement. This tweet, it's not first principles thinking. It's not in good faith dialogue. This is a dishonest mischaracterization. Nobody's calling you a liar. People say things in the heat of the moment that are dishonest, though. This is a dishonest mischaracterization of the tens of thousands of people who are blowing up your website. This is not an own on Elon. This is not dunking on Elon. I know that you can bring the ban hammer down, and I know that you are going to be tempted to do so, that you already have with the Groypers, which, by the way, you have to undo that, man. You blanket banned people, not for saying not for posting swastikas, but for stating their opinion on this H-1B issue. That is a complete violation of the trust that the people you wanted to like you placed in you when you said that you're for free speech. It's straight George W. Bush, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. That's what this is. You're either agreeing with me or you're fucking an enemy. You're an enemy. It's not an argument. It's not a well-reasoned position. It's just my way or the highway. Is that what free speech is? Is that who you are? You can just be a celebrity. You can be like Ellen DeGeneres. You can be like The Rock. And you can get Ozempic, you can get breast implants, start going on The View. Whatever you want for popularity. You can do that, of course. But to the extent that you have popularity, if you keep digging this hole, it will be misplaced, and it'll be there because you're rich. What does winning actually mean? Healthy functioning societies, they need more than gadgets. They need more than Marvel, more than goy slop. They need a shared ideology, heritage, history, beliefs and values, religion, or they collapse and they crumble. That's Babel, that's Rome, That's every empire that's been crushed because there wasn't social cohesion. Basic bitch libertarian principles aren't enough. Maybe they're enough to get at VC funding, maybe they're enough to create an interesting exercise of some sort, but they're not enough to hold people together. And again, we're back to the idea of people as a collection of economic units. That's what at the foundation of Marxism, that reality is just math. And thus the justification for a lot of Marxism is also what leads Silicon Valley libertarian type people to attempt to quantify the unquantifiable. Mount Rushmore, the space program, the interstate system, motion pictures, electricity, these are all things that are not quantifiable. So they're quantifiable in the sense that you can look back and you can say that they cost X amount of dollars or that a certain amount of concrete and steel was used in their construction. But these dream projects are unquantifiable things. There's no slider in the program where you can crank up the number of Indians to 200 million and bring the American dream to fruition faster, okay? There's no data entry point where you can bump up the Indians and get Chrysler buildings popping up everywhere, more Art Deco construction. We do not need more bloated code bases, more tech gadgets, more poorly run hotels, more work ethic, okay? What we need is we need leaders willing to fight for the American people, not for corporations, not for the idea of America, but for the American people. That is the only thing that we need on the brink of collapse, on the eve of our crumbling. It needs to be something higher, a higher ideal than tech company market caps. If it's just...
And that's a great point, right? That, like I say, that the great civilizations, they had higher ideals, and the higher ideals wasn't just making money and buying a bigger house, for example, right? And he's talking about how tech company stocks have taken priority, and that's what it's really about, right? It's about cheap labor. It's not about US workers. It's not about making US the best country. It's about tech company stocks, like he's saying here, right? Now, what makes a company or country actually function, and a country actually somewhere where people want to be? Free speech, a close connection with the history, common shared religion, racial identity, ideology and heritage, and common values, right? It's not just economic units that can work and consume together, right? That's not really what a person is, right? And this is a major reason why people feel worthless. There's a lack of human identity that people feel. They just feel like, oh, what is their job? What is their life identity? It's just their job title. People don't really have the community sense that they're looking for, right? People want to feel like they're born into a community and a culture and not just a job title. And that brings us to the question, what is a country? What is America, right? America, and this is what you see right now, this bit of an issue going on politically now, even within the right wing. How are we defining things? Is it about the American worker or about the American corporation, right? And there's a conflict there. You have these American workers saying, well, we need to get fair wages, we need a stable middle class, and then the American corporations, also on the right, and Elon Musk, Grant Cardone, Vivek, other people like that who are billionaires or very, very rich, they will say, well, they aren't aligned. They just want cheaper workers, regardless of whether that benefits the everyday American or not. And that's what I mean. Like, they don't have common ground culturally, but not necessarily economically, even though they think they would, right? Even though they both voted for Trump. Now, let's dig a bit deeper into Western culture and the way it works at a broader level.
Your male cheerleaders. Is everybody on fentanyl? Everybody working at D'Angelo's? Everybody working at the mall? They're all retards. Everybody who's had their lives destroyed by Big Pharma, by the grist mill of inflation and taxation, everybody that's been betrayed by their leadership in this country, are they all retards? Is everybody who's got, and this is a lot of people, who has $400 in their bank account and is getting hit with overdraft fees and has the landlord from hell, are they all retards? You work at a sub sandwich shop. You couldn't invent PayPal. If you really believe that these people are all retards, then you have no place in the discourse going on about the future of this country. You are just a computer guy. And I don't think you really believe that. I hope to God that you don't. But if that's really what you believe, then you're not a leader. I could say fuck you. I could say take a step back and fuck your own face. But I'll say this. If you really believe that the American people are retards, which they are, we got male cheerleaders in the NFL, but if you really do not have in your heart grace and respect for the Homer Simpson, vinyl siding, economy shitbox driving retards who make your dream possible, if you have a heart, if you are a human being, then that will sting harder than telling you to go fuck yourself. You can do the go fuck yourself all day. I tell myself to go fuck myself. You can say that all day. Fuck you, fuck you. I say that in the mirror when I wake up and when I put makeup on. Who gives a fuck? If you believe these people are retards and you don't have any goodwill towards them, then you're not a leader. You're just a nerd. And there's plenty of those. There's plenty of nerds who got lucky.
So this is a key point. Lots of this systematic destruction and systematic managed decline, you might have had many politicians in the West talk about the managed decline of the West. It's all by design, right? Everything you see is by design. Deliberately, like I say, making the masses dumb down, focus on being lazy, being consumers, big pharma, feeding people opioids. The opioid crisis isn't a coincidence. You can look into Afghanistan, the Sackler family, and these big corporations that essentially benefited from getting people hooked on opioids. And all this mental health medication, everyone has a mental health issue. If everyone has a mental health issue, obviously there's a systemic issue in the society. It's not just everyone just randomly has mental health issues. It's all linked to a failing society, right? Same thing with inflation and tax. None of this is coincidence. The central banks printing money out of thin air, destroying the middle class through money printing, quantitative easing, high taxes. It's all by deliberate, it's the deliberate impacts that they want to have. Same thing with mass migration. They know when they have mass migration, it's going to reduce your ability to afford to buy a house because the price of property is going to go up dramatically. Same thing with feminism, destruction of the family structure, no fault divorce. No wonder people aren't having kids. It's all deliberate influence by this system. It's not an unintended consequence of having these type of policies, right? So what he's saying is a lot of the rage and unhappiness people have is justified. It's not just this case where American workers are dumber than the foreign workers. It's just they've had a lot of essentially assault by this system to destroy them, right? He talks about people not having a lot of money in savings. $400 would be the average amount for many people. And people are kind of fed up with being treated with no dignity at mass level. And that leads to people venting on social media, which inevitably leads to, in the future, civil unrest and social instability if the establishment doesn't take them seriously. Now let's listen to the final clip he has here.
The idea that these tech guys want to bring in exceptional people is just not true. They're looking to hire basically slaves who can't leave their company without leaving the country, who will work for 50%. That's the other thing. They keep saying they'll work 80 hours a week, which is bullshit. Nobody works 80 hours a week. They work 20 hours a week of actual work, and the rest of the time is spent fucking around on the phone and showing the boss that they're working 80 hours a week, sitting in the office. They're not actually working 80 hours a week. And furthermore, why should anybody have to work 80 hours a week? Why is this a race to create slaves? Why is that a good thing? Why is that a humane thing? Why is that good for humanity? How is it possible, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're left or right, why is it a good thing to want slaves? They'll work 100 hours a week. They'll work in their sleep. They'll work 200 hours a week. They'll work infinity. They'll have no lives. That's not a good thing. If you want more hours out of somebody, you have to pay them more. It's just money. They'll do it for $20,000. That's what they're saying. They're pretending like they're complimenting their diligence and their work ethic. What they're really saying is we can hire them for cheaper. That's what that means. 80 hours a week or pay them $100,000 more a year. It's the same thing. They're just saying you can pay these people $150,000 instead of $400,000 or $80,000 instead of $250,000. It's just money. Any system that gets set up is going to be gamed. This one is gamed by Indians who are master gamers. Pull up the Cognizant article. This is a company that was found guilty of setting a pattern and practice of discrimination against non-South Asian and non-Indian workers. That's not the intention of the program. The intention of the program is to create a meritocracy. But like Thomas Sowell said, you have to judge things on their outcomes, not their intentions. You could make a law called the everybody good, free money, everything good law, but if the end result is that quality of life goes to shit, That's what you have to judge it on. And so this H-1B stuff, you can't judge it on the floral, high-minded, beautiful, humanistic language that's used to sell it. That's just propaganda. You have to judge it on the end result. Here's another one. Hire workers at a fraction of the cost of American workers. Force them to work longer hours because they won't leave their job, because if they quit, they're gone from America. This is not helped by a government oversight committee or anything like that. It's just the case that when you set up a system that can be gamed, it gets gamed. That's how people work. They're looking for the path of least resistance. They're looking to maximize their benefit from the system. That's just human nature. Massive payouts over claims they discriminated against American workers in favor of foreign workers. Apple paid $25 million to the deal, which is like $25 to a regular person. Apple engaged in a pattern of citizenship status discrimination in recruitment positions. The claim that we can't find talented people here is nonsense. That's dishonest. The claim should be that we can't afford to pay talented people enough, or we don't want to. Sorry for getting overly serious here with you.
So as you can see, right? So what he's essentially saying is that, you know, the way that outsourcing works for H-1B visas, H-1B visas, is essentially people will go from India to work in America. If they lose their job, they have to be deported unless they find another job quite quickly, which is going to sponsor their work visa in the US. And it does create a slave labor class, right? And if you look at the way America's worked historically, or many countries that have had so-called success, they've always had a slave class. And it's kind of a controversial topic, but if you look at empires throughout time, they've always had a low labor class, or they might be a very low paid slave class, serfdom. You look throughout Europe, they don't use the term slave, sometimes they use the term serfs, which would be people who'd be working in fields, in farming and things like that, not making much money, not having much ownership of their land or anything like that. So that's typically how a lot of these systems work, right? And the thing is, these things are not sustainable, like he says. It really puts people under a lot of pressure, not just the US worker, but also the Indian worker, right? And he talks about how a lot of office work is being fake busy, acting, 80-hour work weeks. And I noticed that not just in these kind of migrant tech jobs, but also in the finance sector. You know, many investment banking jobs, you might have these 80-hour, 100-hour work weeks. And yeah, some of those work hours are quite busy, but some of it is just kind of busy work, fake admin work that you end up doing, or sitting around waiting for client queries. And then you have all this time, you're kind of on edge working, or giving the false pretense of working, keeping up an act of professionalism just to kind of get through the work day, so your manager perceives you quite positively. And he's got a lot of good points there, right? Sometimes people will be sitting around doing a little bit of work, but then the real work tasks come in later in the day, so end up having so-called 80-hour work weeks, but a lot of the time is actually wasted time. It's quite an inefficient way of working. And the system, if you look at how it operates, it doesn't want citizens. It doesn't want competent, productive citizens, either from the US or from migrant workers. It wants a slave underclass, right? That's the goal. Otherwise, they would have not focused on dumbing down and consuming and focusing on consumerism for US citizens. It won't focus on low-cost, cheap labor from India. It would focus on, like I say, competent, productive employees and citizens and workers, but that's not what it wants, right? The purpose of the system is what it results in. That's a little acronym I've seen online a few times, right? The purpose of a system is what it results in. People wonder like, oh, why is this an unintended consequence? No such thing as unintended consequences. They know what they're doing, right? Longer hours, more pressure, lower living standards. These are the results that the system intended to have. Now, if we look at this tweet, you know, which I think is a fair comment, it's a common sense approach. I want every single heritage American, like an American who's been there for several generations, to have a job that they're properly compensated for before a job is considered for a migrant worker. That might seem radical, but it's not. It's just common sense to look out for people in your own country rather than people outside of your country, right? And I think this is common sense, you know, building a middle class, not focusing on cheap labor for globalism or globalist multinational corporations. In fact, many developing countries, you know, they don't have free trade. And lots of people hear this term in the West, free trade, fair trade, free trade. We need international movement of labor and capital. That's not how developing countries work, by the way. You know, I've visited many developing countries throughout Latin America. They have very heavy protectionist policies, which means that they don't have a lot of labor coming in. They don't have a lot of goods coming in, say from Amazon and places like that, that would destroy their local farmers and agriculture and local workers. That is very done at a very strict basis, right? And if you have massive import taxes, if you're importing goods from outside into some of these developing countries because they want to protect their economy, in the same way the West should protect their labor and protect their capital, right? You don't want to have massive labor competition from people who do the same job for a third of the salary, right? And I think that's very important, to have these high barriers to avoid destroying your own workers and the middle class. Here we have, a controversial figure who says that woke DEI, the leftists, say that giving white people's jobs to brown people or people of other ethnicities is what they want to do on the left. And on the right, they have a different perspective with the same end goal. Color-blind meritocracy is giving white people's jobs to brown people. So what he's saying is on the left, they're saying, let's give white people's jobs to ethnic minorities on the basis of DEI, but the right, in the end, has the same end goal, and they define it slightly differently as a meritocracy, a color-blind meritocracy where they're hiring migrant workers, right? And the truth is, DEI typically doesn't work well for white people or for men, particularly white men, and I think it's arguable they have similar results. And this establishment, if you're familiar with the Hegelian dialect or problem reaction solution, the people who are real elites, not just the presidents you see, they have the same end goal, right? They might use the left-wing ideology or the right-wing ideology or the different political movements to reach the same end goal. And I think he's got a fair point in this type of criticism here. And I've got a slight comment here on his tweet where I say, this term, white people's jobs, white job, black job, you might have heard Trump refer to black jobs, and he said a lot of black jobs are going to migrant Hispanic workers, right? And what does he mean by that? Is he talking about white jobs being office jobs and black jobs being trade jobs or working in lower wage jobs? What does he mean by that? It's kind of vague. And the way I want to see it is, or explain it is, we might think topics are about race, right? And to a certain extent, there is some validity there. But I think a lot of this is about these major corporations who want low-paid average workers to maximize their profit. For example, in the UK, many British white people are losing their jobs to Eastern European white people in the sense of the construction workers and the trade workers, right? So that's an interesting point to make there, right? It's white people losing their job in the West to lower wage white workers coming from Eastern Europe, from Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. They're taking many of the jobs from the white people in the West, in places like the UK, in construction, other labor roles. So it's not just a racial element, it's really a low cost of labor issue. So that's interesting to consider.